and light, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of El Podcast, the greatest virtual happy hour in the world, as you know. We have a very interesting topic today, and it's called Gen X versus Millennial. And we have our good friend Dan Mathias from Wisconsin joining us. And by the way, you know, I've always loved time traveling through hearing people's stories. You know, it's a treat. So thank you, Dan, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Oh, by the way, what's everybody drinking? It is a happy hour after all.
I got Mountain Dew and water.
That's it. We're drinking the Voodoo Ranger.
Yeah, I got
Juicy Force IPA.
Yeah, I got the other half of Kai's Juicy Voodoo Ranger. I mean, it is noon here as Kai's Juicy something, but yeah, it is noon here. So as you know, in Wisconsin, it's always 5 o'clock.
It's always beer o'clock in Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a fact, everybody. Let's get into it. But before we do, a quick shameless plug for our new listeners out there and are not subscribed. Please subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Spotify. You won't regret it. Promise. So baby boomers are defined as anyone born between 1946 and 1964. Generation X is defined those who are born between 1965 and 1980. So Dan, which category do you fall under?
Actually, technically, I'm at the very, 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 very end of baby boomers. I was born in June of 64, but I always considered myself a Gen X because of the way my parents were raised and the way they raised me.
The bottom end of each of these categories, like you kind of grew up in the next generation, really, you know?
Right.
Jesse and I are both early millennial, early 80s kids. So
yeah, I mean, I'm 1982 and Kai's 1981. So we're at the very start of that. I mean, I think it's even hard to like compare myself to someone born at the very end of it in 96, you know, like to think like our generation was way before internet. And if you were born in 96, you were already 3 or 4 years into the internet.
Well, and by the time you guys actually reached your peak in teens, you had the internet at your disposal already.
That we did.
And kind of was just, we were on the leading edge of the internet. Nobody really knew what the internet was yet.
Where did you grow up, Dan? Talk a little bit about your background.
I grew up on a little farm outside of Bondwell, Wisconsin. It's like a 100-acre farm, little hobby type farm. So, you know, my parents were from the baby boomers in the silent era. So they were ones that, you know, they'd come out of the Depression type era, or their parents came out of the Depression era. So basically they were workers. They wanted to work for a living and make their money working. And then as they were raising us kids on the farm, it was mainly to keep us working like they always did, you know, because they had to work for everything they ever got. And as our generation grew up in that era, we learned that working kind of sucked. You know, every single day working for $1 or $2 a day was not your idea of a good time. So, yeah, I mean, I loved what I did. I loved where we grew up. I loved the way my parents raised us. It was definitely something I would never change. It was a high strict family. It was a loving family. But, yeah, it was a lot of work every day.
How many siblings did you have? I mean, I think if you're growing up on a farm, typically you have more siblings so they can kind of help out. You know, it's their workers, you'd think.
You know, ours was a hobby farm. So it consisted of, you know, some beef cattle, some sheep and chickens and things like that, you know, to keep us busy with chores. But I had one brother and 2 sisters.
Right. So that's pretty small for a farm, but I guess it is a hobby farm.
Right. But I worked as a kid. I constantly worked on the dairy farms around me. So I was always exposed to milking cows morning and night. You know, you'd get up at 5 a.m. and before school, go milk 100 cows, and then go to school at about a half hour after it started most of the time because you couldn't get out of the barn in time to get to school on time. So it was a lot of that. And then you come home right after school, go right back into the barn, work until 6, 7 o'clock at night. Then your evening started where you could actually start doing things.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So we were reading that your generation, Gen X, was labeled as the latchkey generation.
Yeah, there were a lot of kids that were latchkeys in that time, especially if you grew up in small towns, because that was the first time that parents started working out of the home more. There wasn't the stay-at-home mom all the time. I mean, I grew up with a stay-home mom, but she managed the household and the farm and everything, where my father worked outside the house. He worked for the FAA for like 30 years. So, but the latchkey kids, I knew a lot of kids on my bus that would go home. They'd have the key around their neck. They'd come home because both parents were working all day long. So they'd have about 2-3 hours there where they're all by themselves.
Yeah, I've read that 40% of kids in your generation were latchkey kids. I mean, you're talking almost half.
Yep.
What did they do after school when the parents were not there? Was it, television? Was it like, playing outside?
TV was in my home. Just to give you an idea, TV was incredibly limited. In fact, during our entire summers, TV was unplugged and removed basically from the home. The only people that watched it were the parents at night for news, and that was it. Or maybe a Saturday, and you got some Saturday morning cartoon type things. But for a lot of us, there was no TV, wasn't allowed. But a lot of kids after school, basically, there was always your chores. There was always your homework, of course. But a lot of these kids started doing a lot of the household chores for mom and dad because they weren't home. So, I mean, I grew up in a house where you're still doing dishes by hand. So it's not throw it in a dishwasher and walk away. Mm-hmm. You're sitting there with your sister fighting with her for an hour trying to get a couple dishes done that your mother made, after that day. So it was a lot of that type of work.
I wonder if in the cities was the same.
Though I did have some cousins that would visit us out in the country once in a while. And it was pretty funny because we always had this rivalry between them of us country kids and the city kids. They were like always, they'd come out and go, well, what do you people do out here? There's nothing to do. And we'd be like, are you kidding? And that's when we'd pull out. You were allowed to do a lot more things back then than you are nowadays. It was nothing for us kids at anywhere from 10 to 15 years old to go pull out a bunch of 22s and start shooting things or taking and blowing up with M80s and stuff like that. It was just, that was part of your existence. You'd have the big sand pile that you'd play in for hours on end with all your little equipment that you do. And then you'd set up all your army guys and throw M80s at them and blow them all up. You can't have a kid doing that in town nowadays. That's for sure.
Where would you guys get these M80s?
You could buy them on the reservations around here back in those days.
As a kid, you could buy it, or your parents had it?
Yeah, you could go buy your little brown bag of little M80s. And my favorite thing to do with M80s was, funny enough, it was, remember the car cleaners on top, the old air cleaners on top of cars? They had the round, big air cleaner that you spun on. I would take one of those and tap the center out, and it had the hole in it. You could set that on the road with an M80 fuse sticking out the top, light that fuse, and that thing would blow up in the air about 100 feet straight up. And I would sit there on the road just blowing this thing up and down for hours.
Man, you kids are trouble.
Oh, we did way more crazy things than that.
Yeah. Let's move to fashion.
My parents came out of the Depression era. So everything was like a lot of hand-me-downs for myself. I saw fashion. I would go, wow, I love that. I could never really get it. Because it was, yes, my parents could afford it, but they didn't want to give it to you because if you wanted it, you had to work for it. So it was a matter of, so fashion-wise, my mom is one of these people that still to this day would rather buy something from a thrift store or a Goodwill store than to go into a department store and purchase it. And yet, she has the full ability to purchase anything she wants. She's not like this poor dirt, farmer woman. She's done very well for herself in her life. And it's a matter of, but she still has that instilled in her. So through her life, she's always instilled that in us kids. I am still not a big fashion person. I mean, I still want to look good. I still want to, dress right, but I do not go after name brand labels at all. It doesn't matter to me. I could care less what people are wearing. Unless it's really hot and I love the look of it. And then it's like, oh, hell yeah.
I mean, today, like, there's a huge consumer culture. Like, where do you think that stems from then? Like, if I think most people kind of emulate their parents, or they get values that are instilled from their parents. And if your generation,
and that's a big part of city living versus country living. Your city people are going to be much more, the mothers and fathers were much more in tune with fashion because of the office work they were doing. But even there, my father worked for the FAA, and his fashion was still just a shirt, tie, slacks, done. There was no, and you had a suit for weddings and church on Sunday type thing. And my mom, I think, owned maybe 2 or 3 dresses that she wore during those same type of occasions. And same with us kids, but other than that, it was, you had your school clothes. And basically when it came to school clothes, we went shopping once a year, and you got 1 or 2 new outfits, actually new. All the rest were hand-me-downs or from Goodwill.
I want to kind of unbox again the your parents that came from Depression era. Describe what that's like.
They used everything, and when I say they used everything, they never threw anything away if they could figure out a way to use it. Just give you an example, like you make your coffee every morning, right? You got those coffee grounds in the bottom. You grab that little container and you toss it, right? Not my mother. My mother was one that would take those coffee grounds out. She would lay them out and re-dry them and then use them in fertilizers and feeds and things like that. Everything she could ever get her hands on was recycled in some way or another. We had separate containers at home, what we called our little bucket under the sink. It was all of your trash type things would go into that bucket and be refed to the animals in some way, shape, or form. Even the eggshells from our eggs, from the chickens that we would raise, those eggshells, the part that would drive me insane as a kid was you'd go to start the oven to throw something in there, you'd turn on the oven. All of a sudden, 5-10 minutes later, you're going, what the heck is that smell? And you realize, oh, mom's got her dish of eggshells sitting in the oven to dry out, and you're starting to cook these things now and they're burning. So the smell was always horrible if you did that. But those eggshells, she'd regrind and put back into like the chicken feed because it helped them develop the shell on the egg. But it was basically anything like that. So things that, like, if you broke it, you had to fix it. It wasn't a matter of you just, okay, throw it away, like your generation kind of is known as like the throwaway gen, where, it's pop it in, don't need a new one, pull it out, put a new one in, and go move on. Our gen was, we were taught from our parents that if it breaks, you better fix it because there is no new part laying here that you can go get. So you would have to figure out a way to jury rig it, put it back together. Even with me, as my electronic career developed and started, in the beginning of it, back in the 80s, it was all repair. It was pull a circuit board, determine exactly what's wrong with that board, pull that component, put a new one in. And then as time went on, as you guys were born, now that we were starting to be able to throw things away finally. And even to me, it was like we'd hang on to a lot of these things trying to figure out, well, can we maybe use some parts off of them or not? So it was a lot of that type of thing where we did it out of necessity, not necessarily we could just go buy a new one and reuse and throw away the old one.
Well, it's an interesting point because, like, that was back when you could actually repair things. I mean, now, like, there's this whole right to repair movement because Apple and these other big manufacturers, they don't want you to work on anything. You're not even able to. And if you can't, they make it that way. You need special tools. They won't even send you the manual. And if you happen to be able to somehow figure it out, you void the warranty, or the whole device will just automatically essentially stop working. And even
Right.
cars are getting that way. I think that's one of the big reasons for the push to EVs is because you essentially don't own the car. It's like a cell phone. You might own the cell phone, but you don't own the operating system underneath that cell phone, just like you wouldn't own the operating system of the EV.
Right. Now think of it this way. You take that step one further is think about what's happening is as my gen came in, we were taught by our parents, you had to repair everything. You had to fix it. So what are we doing? We're mechanically inclined. We're able to pick up things and build it and we were a lot of craftsmen in my era. Your era came along and all of a sudden now you're the throwaway generation. So all that craftsmanship that we want to pass on to you, no one's picking up because you're not forced to repair things. You could throw it away and buy a new one. So even your tables at home, you'd say, I'll just buy a new table because the table leg is broke. You wouldn't go outside, find a chunk of wood, throw it on a lathe, spin up that same leg, and then replace it and be proud that you put that there. You would throw the whole table away and buy a whole new table. So now that skill set is disappearing as time goes on. The new generations, Gen Z, and the next one's Gen C, I think it is. I don't think these kids can even repair anything nowadays. You'll find that your artist people are the ones that are much more skilled at creating and reproducing something. And, a lot of people are cooks. Yes, that's a little different. But when it comes to my machine's broke, what do? Well, a lot of people got to take it somewhere. Well, that set of people you're taking it to are disappearing.
You think that just goes back into the consumer culture then? I mean, like this is all done on purpose because the manufacturers make more money making you buy a new product.
Yeah, how did we get there? How do you think we got there to the throwaway culture? I mean, the TV, the microwave dinners and TV dinners came out in 86.
Okay. Think about it. What it comes from is the baby boomers that came up. They're coming out of the Depression era. They're working hard for everything they earn. I remember as a kid, we would have to go bale hay. Okay. And baling, if you've never physically baled hay, it sucks. It's the worst job in the world. But we would go out, bale hay all day long. And I mean all day long, like 10, 12 hours for that day. You are wiped out throwing, 60, 80 pound bales around all day long. You are sweating. You are tore up. At the end of that day, your reward for that entire day's work was a bottle of soda. That's it. One bottle of that little cheap soda stuff back then. That's what you got. But you were so proud of that bottle of soda because you worked all day long for it. Now, the problem is, as I got older and as my gen got older, we were working like this all the time. You know what? Working like that sucked because you didn't get the reward out of it. So as I had children and as my other generation had children, we decided that, you know what? I don't want my kids to have to work so hard for everything that I had to work for. I want to be able to give them whatever I can to get them to the next level where they can do something. So what we did is we started the revolution of this disappearing skill set. And it's lousy because we can't reverse it.
You take full responsibility then.
Yeah, we can take definitely full responsibility for the way.
Holy crap. I've never heard that before. An actual parent.
I do, but yeah, it's our gen. We kind of screwed it up. We should have kept pushing for people to do more of a skill set style labor instead of going, here's everything you need, child. And that's what we did. You can go back in the 80s, especially like the 80s, when our generation started having children. Look at the plastic crap we bought our kids. All the plastic slides, the plastic little cars, the plastic, little rocking horses. I remember my house being full of this stuff for my children. It was like people just bought this stuff constantly, and it was just this throwaway mess that we ended up with. And that's exactly what we did. We threw it all away, filled our landfills with it, and that's the stuff that's still sitting there today, not degrading like it should have with the recyclable type materials that are available nowadays.
What's the percentage of all the trash or plastic trash in landfills that
couldn't tell you?
We can say is indirectly related to your bad parenting behavior.
It would be interesting to take landfill and slice it do a large slice in it, just like you would a mountain to tell what the years and ages are. I bet you would find in that era the amount of trash that's decomposing, the stuff from the 80s is probably your thickest layer.
Oh, wow. That would be very interesting to see imagery of that. If you could.
Yeah, it would.
The TV dinners, the throwaway containers, the whatever. That was all a thing. And we got busier.
Yeah.
And busier and busier and so on. Wow. I've never heard that before. Thank you for being brave enough to admit that it was all your fault.
See, that's where I was supposed to be incognito. I don't want to blame everything, but yeah, that's a big screw up on our gen. So, and you know what? When you think about it, think about what we did with that by giving our children everything that we never had because we had to work so hard for everything we wanted. We decided that when our gen came up and our kids came up, we went, our kids are not going to have to work as hard as we did. So that's exactly what we did. You know what? Our kids got lazy. They got really lazy. And I still struggle with my children to this day sometimes of they don't have the work ethic that we did back then. You know, one thing I remember.
That's not everybody, by the way.
That's not everybody. But I remember when I was a kid getting hired in the electronic computer industries that I was working in. One of the things I would put on my resume is, I grew up on a farm. They loved it because they knew that my work ethic from growing up on a farm was right to the grindstone. They knew I was going to go in there and work my hardest for whatever they needed to do.
How many kids do you have, Dan?
I have 3. I have a set of twin daughters and she's 22 now, the last one. So my twins are 29 and my youngest is 22. All girls.
So if you could go back in time and instill different values in them, I mean, would you have different parenting techniques, or what would you do differently when it comes to specifically how you raise those children of yours?
Well,
after saying what you just said.
Definitely. I agree. You know, I would push them more. You know, I would turn the TVs off. I would definitely pull them away from the videotape era. You know, my kids went through this era of where, you know, every Barbie movie known to man was in my home, you know, in a VHS format. So these kids were always watching these videos because it was like, you know what? This is a great babysitter we figured out. Well, the problem is they weren't learning anything. Just like the kids nowadays, they stick their face in a phone. Most of them have no social ability, but we started it. You know, we didn't take our kids out of the house and say, get your butt outside, play more. Here's a piece of wood. I want you to build something out of it. You know, I tried to encourage my children for a lot of stuff, but also I had exes that wanted to push it the other direction. So, you know, you wish you could go back and change it all. But it is what it is nowadays. And my kids are still doing great. You know, they're not like burdens on society or anything like that, which I'm grateful of. But I see it in them with their work ethic. It's not the same. I can't get them here to work all day long with me on something because that ability to do that isn't there.
It seems to me like, you know, nowadays a lot of parents want to be friends with their little kids.
Yeah.
And it's like you're the adult in the room. Like you shouldn't be friends with them. I mean, when they're older, that's one thing. But when you have a 10-year-old, like you're the adult. Like if you let that 10-year-old dictate what he wants, what you're going to do, I mean, I think you're setting that child up for disaster.
But now you're starting to cross a line here because in our gen, we were raised by parents that were very strict. Okay. Spanking was a norm and we accepted it. I would never change the way I was raised because I fully believe in it because it taught me right and wrong. Well, as my children grow up, the whole piece came into society of going, you can't do that anymore. And we're all looking at it going, well, that's the way we were raised and it really worked. Well, no, now society's telling you can't do that anymore. So people started backing away from it and backing away from it and backing away from it. So now these kids are allowed to tell you anything they want to your face and you have to accept it and you can't do anything about it. But you still should be able to.
I think they also have the internet, so I feel like kids always feel like they're a lot smarter than their parents, only to realize that they weren't.
Yeah.
But I have a question. Circling back to, I like your theory about, you know, the evolution of our generations, and it's very interesting. But I think there might be other factors, and I think maybe technology played a part. So the personal computer in the Jesse, was it like in the mid 70s?
Yeah, I mean, I think
personal computer.
IBM released their first personal
Yep,
computer in
they released the
1975.
IBM PC. It had a 10 meg hard drive in it, and that 10 meg hard drive probably weighed about 25 pounds.
Yeah, and then
he remembers the weight and everything.
Computer. Then the XT followed that later on with when the ST225 Seagate 20 meg hard drive that we thought was amazing.
I think Dan might be hinting at what his career was without saying it, with that piece of knowledge that he just shoved down your throat without really wanting to.
The fact that he remembered the model is pretty phenomenal. But let's talk about when the computers came. You would have been then early teens or whatever, and obviously you lived in a farm. But like, how did then the personal computer change, life in general, in schools and things of that nature?
It was interesting because I grew up, in a small town of only about 1,000 people, and they had a computer class there. It was a computer club, but most of us didn't really even know what you would do with a computer. Your geekier kids, good friend of mine, he was in the computer club all the time, and he was really getting into it, and he still works for Intel now. Still to this day, he still works for Intel. But that class didn't really interest me too much. I was more of, okay, here's my wood shop, here's my auto mechanics class, I'm doing all my basic studies and everything. It was until after high school when during high school, you're messing with your guidance counselor, is the only way that you could find out things in the world about where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do. So my path was, I was trying to find more about California. I wanted to find out, how do you get into movie making? Not movie making necessarily. I wanted to get into prop making. I was really good with modeling and restoring cars and building things and all that. So I wanted to start working on movie sets, building sets of some kind and doing their lighting and things of that nature. So I kept on my guidance counselor, how do I find out about this type of information? Where can I go? What can I do? He couldn't answer any of it for me. He couldn't get any information because this was prior to internet. So he couldn't.
No internet.
No internet. So you could just type it up in Google, like, oh yeah, here's what you need to do. No, there was no brochures, nothing. Well, he found a school for me that did mixing music and lighting. And I decided, fine, I'm going to go to that school and do this school, And I moved to Minneapolis when I was 18, and I went to Brown, and they had a course there for this mixing music and lighting and all that. Well, I was a good student, but I wasn't like your top line straight A student. So I kind of struggled with things. And this course, unfortunately, was the hardest course they had. Tons of people I knew were taking it and failing it because it was so difficult. And I was like, I can't afford to take this course and drop my grades and fail this whole thing. So I decided at that point, like, okay, maybe I won't take this mixing music and lighting and all this that I wanted to do. I'll take this thing called computers. And that was it for me. After that, I dove into the computer industry for 40 years.
So is that Brown Institute in the Twin Cities you went to?
Yep. Yeah.
Which is now, of course, defunct. They went defunct a few years back, but.
Yep. That's where I went. That was so much fun. Spread across Lake Street back then.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be one of the top radio broadcasting schools in America, but of course, as the radio broadcasting industry has been replaced by podcasting, or what we're doing right now, the attempt at a podcast with El Podcast. Please like and subscribe, by the way.
There is no try, only do. Was that the quote?
That's right, it is. I think that is Brown's quote.
No, it was Yoda. So you retired recently.
Yes,
congratulations.
I did. Just recently.
Drink to your retirement right here.
pretty much what I did was when I was in school, I, of course, needed work. So, and I was really good at fixing stuff. I could fix anything you put in front of me. My mechanical skills are through the roof because of growing up the way I did. Something broke, you had to fix it. So I've always been that way. The computer industry discovered this, and I actually started working for a dental company out there in the Twin Cities. And I started doing their shipping, receiving. Then the guys figured out, hey, you can fix keyboards and monitors and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it's no big deal. So I started cranking this stuff out. Then they started going, okay, well, since you're so good at fixing this, why don't you, they hired me right out of school, put me on the road, and I traveled for about 5-6 years all over the United States, installing and repairing these little mini mainframe systems and then swapping them out for the new LAN systems that were coming down the line with IBM and all that. And it was interesting work, but it got to be a lot because I was on the road probably 3 weeks out of a month. So I'm living out of a suitcase all the time. It became, that era, you guys kind of were talking about a little about Steve Jobs type thing. The one part about Steve Jobs is everyone thinks, oh, Steve Jobs, the horror about Steve Jobs back in the 80s was Steve Jobs forced so many of his employees to work unbelievable, crazy hours. I mean, it wasn't a 40-hour work week to him. He wanted you to do 80 hours a week in his office, being there all the time, so dedicated that there was nothing else. He really started that corp type thing. And
he started hustle culture.
Yeah. So it was, I was doing a lot of that, and it was a matter of I'm working just constantly on the road, and it got really lonely. I mean, really lonely because you're by yourself all the time. You talk to people, yes, but you're constantly eating alone. You're constantly in your hotel alone. You're traveling alone. It just got kind of like, great. I got this cool job, travel all over, but nobody cares. Then after that, I finally got sick of doing the travel piece. I decided to make a move to come home because as a kid, me and my brother did a lot of restoration of cars. And some things had worked out where the two of us had possibly talked about opening our own restoration shop, kind of on my parents' place. And so I decided to quit that career and move back to the Green Bay area, Bondwell area. Got home, a few things didn't quite work out. So I figured, well, I got to get back to work. And so then I started working for an electronic assembly place in Appleton area. So I worked there for like another 5-6 years, doing network installs and stuff like that. So basically on my own, I was installing all of the lining. I mean, we used to be we call ourselves wall walkers because we'd be running cable at night and all this. And then, as time went on, I ended up getting married through another story, but I ended up getting divorced and having my twins. I was like one of the very few people in the state of Wisconsin that ended up raising my twins by myself. I was a single dad from about, I don't even know what year it was anymore, but I was a single father raising twins, trying to keep down this electronic career in the industry. And my place of employment was demanding too many hours from me. So I was in a struggle with my life because I was trying to do this career and gain my career, but the career wanted too many hours, and my daycares were saying, you can't work, you can't leave your kids here this long. And churches were getting mad at me because I'm leaving my kids there too long. And I had nobody around here to help me. My parents were on the road at that time. My sister was in Minneapolis. My brother was, I don't even know where he was. But it was just nobody to really help. So as time went on, I decided I have to get out of here and moved in my current position. And the main reason I took it is because there was a daycare right at the end of the road. So I could put my kids in daycare, go to work, see my kids during the day once in a while, pick them up and get them home and turn around and do it all over again. So, and then I stayed there for 30 years.
Yeah. Do you think that's even in today's day and age? Like, is that even, people can do that? Can they duplicate that?
Yeah.
Very difficult. because of nowadays it's more of you're a consultant on your own. You know, you're the intelligent ones are able to take their life and control it like you two are. You know, you run your own lives like a business. You're not trapped by industry anymore. You are now your own boss. Where we kind of got trapped by industry because the biggest problem with this whole thing, it became responsibilities. What are your responsibilities and where are you going to get your money from? Where are you going to get your insurance from? All of this. And I kept going, I have to raise these kids. How am I going to do this with no money, no income? So industry learned that and it trapped you. So you were just, it was very difficult to move to another location because you were living paycheck to paycheck, you know, because of daycare costs and food and trying to raise your kids and all this. So you were right on the edge of just making it all the time. So,
I mean, you used the word trap, you know, for your generation. I mean, I think you could kind of look at it the other way around though, too. I mean, I know a lot of people that are, you know, freelancers or consultants, and I mean, they would love to be in a full-time job. I mean, if you got, you know, without any, you might have a higher wage, but you don't have any health insurance. You don't get any vacation time. You don't have any sick time. You don't have any overtime. You don't have any other benefits. And so like you have no stability. I mean, you could have a really, you know, make a bunch of money one month and the next month, maybe they don't need your services or they need your services for 5 hours a week. And it kind of puts a lot of strain on people. I mean, people in our generation are having kids later, less kids, and it's not like they don't want to have kids. It's just they don't
no kids at all.
No kids at all. They just don't have any stability to even have kids.
You nailed one part of that: insurance. Insurance is a huge part of today's decision making for the youth and people. You know, that was my big thing. I needed insurance. I couldn't survive without this insurance thing, and it was a matter of I have to stay here. If I don't, you know, and now they had it so that if you move from one company to another, it was 6 months sometimes before you could get insurance. I had twins. I couldn't do that. You know, it was, I have to stay here because I can't come up with insurance somehow. And that was a big part of even taking the retirement thing was insurance, you know.
I was taught the same path, you know, like I think my mom and my older brother kind of follow that same path of stability. You know, that's kind of what they needed it. And I was more the black sheep. I remember I felt like I was more lost because I was kind of rebelling against I don't want to be in a 9-to-5. Like I couldn't do it personally, but it was scary to not have the stability, you know. And I ran my own businesses, like in LA, moving to LA. I had my own practice at one point in time, but you know, some days I'll have clients, some days I won't, doing body work. You do have the freedom, but then you're also living paycheck to paycheck, no insurance, so it's kind of like
But what was your responsibility level? What was your personal responsibility level?
Oh, I was just taking care of myself and making sure I got to the waves every day.
As soon as you add children to your mix, the responsibility piece of your life takes over, and it really narrows you down sometimes of what you can do. If you're alone and single like I was, you know, it'd be one thing if I had a wife next to me with a good career going and there's an income coming in, then the transition from one career to another for an adult isn't so bad. But when you're single and you have responsibilities like twins, it's a killer saying, I want to do something different. It's very difficult to make that change. So I got stuck in that little, like, that line of life. And it was very difficult to get out.
I was going to say, I take it back. So I can't complain. I can't compare to Dan at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I often hear people my age or younger that they say the reason they don't want to have kids is because of environmental reasons, where they don't want to put the strain on Mother Nature. But I think they're really just making an excuse for the fact that they just financially can't afford it. And they're trying to, you know, kind of justify their actions.
Yeah.
or justify the reason, because if you don't have health insurance, you don't have a stable job. I mean, like you said, I mean, why would you want to have kids? I think it has nothing to do with the environment. I think it has everything to do with job stability.
Right. And what it is, it's your choice, but it's a matter of what are you choosing? Are you choosing to extend your career, or, to expand your career and turn it into something else, or maybe move to another area? Or are you choosing this path of life to raise life again and try to add them to society like you were talking?
How do you think job status factors in? I mean, like the millennial generation is the first generation to have a lower job status than their parents, have less income than their parents, and even have a shorter life expectancy. And I mean, I see a lot of, it seems like now with all the media that like you're defined by what you do. I mean, if you go, like I lived in Australia for a year and did a work and holiday visa, and I didn't even know what my neighbors did after 6 months. I mean, no one really talked about that. Work was just like a way to put food on the table and to survive, but it wasn't an identifying factor.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up. Where I live too, I didn't even know my neighbors. I lived in a duplex with my kids and lived there for, I don't know, 5-6 years, and I don't think I ever spoke to my neighbors at all. I saw them pop out of their house once, and I was like, okay, I do have neighbors, but that was it. It was more or less just you were in survival mode, like you said, living paycheck to paycheck, trying to just get to work, get home. Pray to God the weekend comes up and you can go do something,
What do you think are some influential events that shaped Generation X?
Ooh, shaped us.
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
That's a loaded question. One of the things that even changed me as a small child, one of my first memories is living, in my father was building a house for us, living in the basement. I remember barely, but I still remember it, the day that my father was sitting in front of the TV watching a man step on the moon. And I remember his excitement and watching that on TV. And that made me realize, wow, that's the moon. And that piece for me started teaching me more about, listening to the book about Horton Hears a Who. You ever heard that story about Horton Hears a Who? He's got the whole world in a little tiny flower. It's a speck of dust on a flower, and he keeps carrying this flower around, and he's trying to tell everyone that there's people on this little tiny piece of dust on this flower, and nobody will believe him. And then because he's got these big ears, he was able to hear these people, and finally he was able to convince people that there were people on this little tiny speck of dust on this flower, and there was a whole nother planet there. To me, that opened my mind as a child and realized, you know what? This earth and us are so tiny and so insignificant that it keeps, the universe keeps expanding. And if you are a believer in God or whatever creation out there, there's no way that our creator or whatever it is ever created this planet or this universe with only one little tiny planet speck of dust like us on it. He's got to, or they have to have spread the seeds everywhere in this universe because it's all over. But that kind of taught me to open up my mind to expanding type thing. So, but kind of back to your question, which you'll have to kind of repeat now because I am getting old and I forgot what the heck.
Influential events that shaped the Gen Xers.
So,
the landing on the moon, it seems like, kind of led to this.
Right. And then, the other ones are like the space shuttle explosion, the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, 9/11. That's more recent.
We both experienced that.
Yeah. I mean, war wasn't, we'd hear about it. Like my era, I was too young to understand Vietnam. I didn't my father served, but he was done serving by that time. My brother was just too young to enter into the Vietnam era. And he was, he went on to the college piece. But it was, as the time went on, it was the 80s that kind of changed things. Cause that's when I moved to Minneapolis. Heck, one of the big culture shocks for me was Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was something that I experienced in Minneapolis for the first time when I was a teen. Very interesting. Hennepin Ave, Lake Street and Hennepin Ave, every Friday night at midnight, they'd show a running of that film. And there'd be a line of all these crazies all lined up in the front. You're like, what's all that about? So one night my friends we went there and sat in the back of the theater. It was the coolest experience I've ever seen. It was very interesting. So yeah, that changed me because it made me realize, you know what? I don't have to be this farm little kid sitting in a field anymore. These people are out there. You know, it really opened my eyes to the difference that people are and the way that they are changing the world. Did I get on board with it? No, I'm still my farm little boy. I still had to work hard. I still didn't have my twins at that time or anything, but that's kind of my direction with it.
You were a teenager in the 1970s when the politically correct movement started. I mean, today it's kind of morphed into the woke movement, wokeism. I mean,
wait, what did you say?
The woke movement.
The woke movement today.
I am not familiar with that. What is the woke movement?
Well, the woke movement would be blaming everything on white males, tearing down statues of Abraham Lincoln and some of the the founding fathers of our nation. I think maybe some of the anti-vax stuff went into that, where if you weren't getting vaccinated, then you wanted to kill your grandma, or you could care less about humanity.
Oh yeah, okay.
The cancel culture goes into that. But I think it started in the 1970s. Even when I was younger, I mean, I think in the 90s, where I got a card from work that had all the new terminology, like you weren't fired or let go, you were separated from employment. And so I think we went from just changing words, just very subtly, to now it seems like you really can't say anything. If you don't believe if you talk, about climate change not being real, or if you actually just like drill down into questions, that somehow it's like a taboo. I think maybe it's just like you can't really talk about a whole lot of topics anymore. Everyone is so sensitive, and like you're talking about, like, raising kids, like, back in the day, you would just maybe discipline your child with spank. I mean, now you might be in jail for doing that same action. Yep. And that kind of, I feel like, started in the 1970s, maybe the 1960s, with the counterculture and the protesting of Vietnam and the civil riots back with Martin Luther King. But it went from that movement to just kind of taking on a life of its own now, where I think we've really regressed a lot in terms of a lot of civil liberties.
I will say this about, the path you're going down right now is one of the things that's also changed that as time went on, are people realized that, you know what, I can make money at doing this. I can make money at suing a company or suing a person because you did something politically incorrect to me. You did sexual harassment towards me. So now I'm going to sue the company because you did that to me. And it was very interesting because I will say this, an experience in my life. I was a supervisor. I had about 10 people under me. We were all in cubes. And one of the things that I did during the course of a day once is gal sitting across the way. She had taken her shoes off on her desk. She's sitting there and she's got these weird socks on that were multicolored. They had the toe thing. Each toe had its own little toe thing on these socks. I'm sitting at my desk, and I, of course, noticed this because they were, fluorescent orange and green and all this. And I just simply looked over one day and I went, oh, those are cool socks. Didn't say nothing about it. Okay. Nothing more. About 5-6 hours later, I got called in my manager's office, and like, yeah, what's up? The gal was bringing up sexual harassment charges on me because I was commenting about her clothing. And I was like, whoa, she was trying to get rid of me because she didn't like me as a supervisor. She had figured out this was a way that she could get rid of me because of the new sexual harassment laws that were being pushed into the industry. So once I was able to clear that up and realize how insignificant, how stupid this was, I really clammed down on no more looking at, when you're talking to a female, you look straight in her eyes. You don't look down at them. You don't say anything about their outfits. You don't say anything about their hair, about their nails, nothing. You leave every personal conversation you would like to have with them out of it.
Not even a compliment, like they're just being nice.
You cannot anymore. And even to this day, when I was leaving the office, it's the same way. In fact, it's 10 times worse nowadays, because now you go through your full ethics and compliance, rehab every single year. You have to agree to all of these standards that the companies are now pushing on you, and so you have to be like the whole unconscious bias thing is now a big play in it too. You can't think about these things anymore because you are thinking wrong according to the company. So they are really clamping down on letting you be a free thinker and say, wow, I really like that shirt on you, Ty. That's an awesome shirt. You can't say anything more about it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. I guess it's kind of like this whole group think. Like if you are a contrarian or if you think differently, then they want to like somehow weed you out. And I guess I just wondered where like that started from. Like, was it like that when you were a kid, or like how did we get to that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I couldn't really answer. I mean,
I kind of just Googled something real quickly. I don't know. I just whatever. It's called the history of woke. And it says here something, given that this oldest known introduction of woke to the mainstream comes in a 1962 opinion piece about how white Americans are always appropriating the black vernacular. It's almost as though the word predicts its own fate. So it roots even like, further down, but I have to do a little bit more reading on this, and this could be a whole entire podcast on.
They probably could
on woke, and they're saying here that in 2008 that the woke movement started gaining more popularity, but
2008, so that'd be about that's about when that all started.
Yeah.
Peter Thiel and David Sachs wrote a book in the 1990s. I think it came out in 1998, talking about all the PC stuff going on at the Stanford campus. So that was 25 years ago now at this point. But he was talking about everything that's going on now. It's almost like a playbook if you read that book to what we're to become.
So what would become better or worse?
It's basically everything that was going on at the Stanford campus in the 80s and 90s is now going on everywhere in America, where you really can't say anything. Like you said, if you have a non-mainstream opinion, if you even think it, like they want to weed that thought process out of you. I mean, people want to talk about.
You're saying this was going on in the Stanford campus. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So he wrote a book just talking about Stanford specifically. I believe that Peter Thiel went to Stanford, but he wrote a book just talking about the Stanford campus, saying that generally things, in the West, things or trends start out on the West Coast and then they migrate east. So, a lot of things start in Hollywood or California, and then eventually 5 or 6, 7 years later or more, they will find their way to Midwest and the East Coast.
Yeah, you'll find that industry weeds a lot out. And they've become very proficient at weeding people out. And that's another subject that if you guys want, I'll talk to you a little bit about something after this that will probably be a whole nother podcast for you two that you would be very interested in, but I won't mention it now.
My next question isn't really related as a generational thing, but just more about regrets, or what would you do differently, now that you have kids and grandkids and seeing just how life has kind of changed since you were a child. That's easy. Yeah, go right back to where the decision that was made when I went to school. I should have just jumped on a bus and went to California and figured it out for myself. I should have done that. I should not have, been the hillbilly kid that moved to Minneapolis and tried this new career thing. I should have just went with my gut
and went to California, my life would be 100% different right now.
It's kind of, funny you say that, because that's essentially what, what Kai Primo did. I mean, right after college, she went to Venice Beach, right, Kai? I mean, how quickly did you leave?
2 weeks later, I couldn't. I was so antsy in college, and I attended my graduation, and I was just like, I've got to get to the West. I've been chanting, I've got to get to the West Coast, even 2 years prior to that. I know I wanted to get out.
The huge advantage you had.
I didn't have kids.
Well, not only didn't have kids, I didn't have kids at the time, but you had the internet. You could look up any thought you had on something and find out information about it. Me, I couldn't. I couldn't turn around and ask a goddamn cow about, this thing in California. The cow or the sheep or the pig couldn't tell me. My guidance counselor in school, the guy that was supposed to tell me everything, couldn't tell me nothing. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't go to a library, find stuff. I didn't know where to go. Nobody gave me direction of what to do. The internet changed all that for all our generations. Now, if anybody wants to know anything, you just look it up. And there's thousands of things out there now you can find out about things. Like this whole thing, I could have been like, oh my God, I would be happy as heck out there.
How do you, what would have happened then if you would have picked up and moved to LA right out of high school?
I wouldn't have any three of my children right now. I know that. But who knows? I probably have still three children. I may have an ex-wife that wasn't as evil as my first ex-wife. So that part you don't know.
Only you had a time machine.
Oh, if I had a time machine, it would be, the thing is even there, it was the whole part about Star Wars was back then, so that's what was intriguing me. I'm going, God, I could have worked on these type of sets and been part of this, building all these models, then developed into the lighting, then developed into the computer industry because, hey, I was still a computer guy. So it would have been amazing doing that type of graphic work. And that's one of the things I try to really instill in my kids, especially my youngest right now, is I'm trying to make her understand that she's in a gap in her life right now between 20 and 26, that she has the world by the balls because she can do anything she wants. Reason? She's under my insurance. So she doesn't have to worry about responsibilities. She's got her money. I keep telling her, quit your lame brain little piddly job you got, which means nothing to anyone, and go. Get in your car and just go. And find who you are and what's going on out there. Find something, look it up, and go do it. And yet, her herself, she's so content or whatever and thinks she can't. And it's like I keep trying to encourage her because this time that she has is very limited for insurance. If she can figure out insurance after 26 and keep it while she's still freelancing across the country, great for her. But then she's got to pay for it, and then it's a whole nother story.
Do you think that's kind of like a blight on the United States, where you have to worry so much about health insurance? I think I read a stat that only 25% of Americans even have a passport, and it's because I think insurance plays a big part of that. When you travel, you see Canadians all over the place, or Europeans, or people from Australia. You don't really see a whole lot of Americans outside of in Mexico or Jamaica or some of the surrounding, the near countries. And I think it is mostly due to health insurance. It doesn't really allow you to kind of, live the life that you want, because you're forced or you're trapped, as you kind of said earlier.
Yep. Yeah. You are trapped by it.
And it's more and more too becoming a gig economy. Like, people do talk about things being a gig economy where people kind of like, there's no insurance. There's no, you have to, unless you're in a full-time job, the 401k, the insurance, and so on and so forth. But most of the time, our generation and even the younger ones are either trying to hustle to make money online, or gigs, or doing gigs,
Have you heard of the quiet quitting that they've been talking about in the news recently?
No. What's that?
Are you familiar with the silent quitting?
No. No.
Well, it's happening with the younger generation, and basically, silent quitting is when employees kind of, because at first you kind of, you're gung ho and your work ethic is you're excited and you're working hard and you're putting everything in and going above and beyond, And I personally have always worked that way, but that's just work ethic, right?
Yep.
But nowadays it's happening more and more, this kind of phenomenon where people are called silently quitting, meaning they're not going above and beyond. They're doing just enough to get by. They're just kind of making it through the day, doing just enough to get by. And that's it.
I mean, I think and a lot of it's how the media, phrases it. If basically they're doing what their job description tells them to do, doing the 9 to 5 and then going home. If their boss calls at 8 o'clock at night, they're not answering it because they're outside of those 9 to 5 hours. I mean, it's all semantics. And if you want to frame it as negative or if you want to frame it as positive, but I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier with Steve Jobs, how he kind of created this generation where you're expected to work 80 hours a week, even though they're still paying you for your 40.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a big thing. And, you're right on the silent quitting. Even with me in the last, several years here, I was probably doing that same thing because I was done. You reach a point in your
burnout.
life, you get burnt out. I was
burnout.
done with the on-call. I was done with the meetings. I was done with the late nights. You're working until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because you're on call. And all of a sudden you're going, guess what? You got a meeting at 6:30 in the morning. So get your ass up and get to work, Granted, the last, 8, 10 years of my career, I was allowed to work at home. A huge benefit. Instead of getting in your car and driving at night into the office, at least I had to stumble out of my bedroom into my office and take care of stuff. But it was still a matter of, you lived by your phone, constantly living by your phone, and you didn't want to hear it. And now that I'm retired and that phone is no longer buzzing every 5 minutes, it's an amazing feeling having it gone, and it's like, even with this retirement and you're talking about insurance and all, the freedom that I am starting to feel from getting rid of the industry and be able to expand in my own life of what I want to go do now, it's incredible. The hardest part for me is I have to figure out an insurance. But the good part is that my daughter is transitioning to her own insurance. The other person I have on my insurance currently is also being able to transition to another. So I personally only have to come up with a single coverage insurance, which is far cheaper, and I can maintain that on my own without an industry to feed it to me. So it's a matter of now I have this freedom to travel, to do what I want, to create what I want. And as long as I make money at it, I don't care. I don't need the benefits that come with it. Yeah. And most people don't have that.
So then that kind of points out that burnout really isn't generational. That's like across the board. Everybody
That's across the board.
Yeah. And I've kind of I've realized I burnt out. I just went through it. Probably still going through it. You kind of, and I was a soldier, I worked my ass off 24/7. Right. And it was like, I was like dedicated, and I looked at myself. I would watch myself be so dedicated to my work that nothing else mattered but work. Under the banner under the banner of like, hey, we're saving the world, until you realize that, like, I'm getting sick, and then you realize that, yeah, I don't have insurance. I'm getting overworked, getting paid. Like, when you add it all up, you're really not getting paid much. Right? Very minimal for your skill set and what you do. And at the end of the day, when you get sick, no one will care about you.
That's right.
Other than yourself. And that was my biggest wake up call. That,
it's even funny with me retiring. It was a blink and not even missed. I'm gone out of the industry. Industry didn't care. It's just like, you're gone. That's it. We're moving on.
You're useful until you're useless.
Right.
Right. And it's just such a, it's such an idiot moment for me. I'm like, man, I was such a fool. Like, why did I do that? Why didn't I have boundaries? Why didn't I, and I had to kind of go through that burnout, get sick and, just be jaded, and to kind of learn that, so that's across the board. I think that's not just our generation.
And I can definitely say about the sickness, because I went through a period too where the stress and everything really destroyed my health for a good 6-8 months. And I went through some pretty serious health issues until I kind of got my life kind of switched around and back on track. And then I realized it was this company that was killing me. And I had to figure out some way to get my stress level down, to get my focus back on track for my own life. And that's what I did. And that's where you were talking about the silent quitting. And that's exactly what I started doing. I started doing the silent quitting because I had to do it for my own sanity and my own health. And nowadays, because of that, it has really increased my health back to where it should be. And I haven't been sick in years. I'm, like I said, now I'm at a free state. So the stress is gone.
Yeah. Well, you're retired, so it's completely different. I think that's pretty phenomenal. Stress is good grief. Like what stress can do for you is can do to you. I mean,
it's bad.
until I really started seeing like the depression, just anxiety, like all of that. And your weight gain, you gain so much weight and you're tired all the time and you still want to push, but man, we're not machines.
Yep.
We're not cattle, but the workhorses I feel are the ones that get taken advantage the most in any workplace. So
yep.
It's, anyway, I don't know how we tangented off to that, but that's a whole other podcast. Yeah. I think burnout is a whole conversation.
Yep. And how to correct it.
And how to kind of recover.
Yeah.
And I hope that, I think more and more, I don't know, there's a lot more kind of like remote work happening. And when I kind of look like at job listings sometimes for like, oh man, when I see remote work, some companies will, sometimes they say on their job description that like, hey, our company values work-life balance, like they will actually say that. You never know until you really get there, but a lot of companies are listing that like as a perk. It's like we care about balance, like, anyway, I'm seeing that recently.
You were talking earlier about, kind of our generation being more freelancers. Do you think that like millennials and some of the younger generations are more entrepreneurial than, Generation X or baby boomers?
Well, definitely. You've got the internet, you've got, you have all the social media that allows you to be an entrepreneurial person all the way. But the problem with that, like I was saying earlier, is the skill sets that are coming into play now are completely different. The actual skills of creating something from nothing, like having a pile of wood in front of you or a pile of rocks or something like that, you only have the artist community that's really still creating things. You have your next gen of these kids coming in and they're going, you know what? I don't have to pick up this wood and build something to make money. I can sit at my computer. I can sit in front of a webcam. I can pick up a microphone and a pen, and I can make a heck of a lot more money than that guy could make making that dresser over there for somebody's house. So, but you see that what's happening is these kids are doing this. They're making a ton of money, but when something breaks, that person that was there for, the last 20, 30, 50 years is disappearing. So when their little thing busts down and they want it, fixed, that person's gone.
So that means that they just buy a new one. Is that what they do?
Right. But
or hire someone else to fix it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we have discovered, we like to flip things. We like to buy and sell, antiques and stuff like that. We attend a lot of auctions and such. One thing we have really noticed in the last couple of years is the trend of the antiques that are coming in. People don't want anymore. They don't want anything to do with furniture. They don't want anything to do with glassware anymore. Something that you would pay $100, $200, 3-4 years ago for glassware, you're paying $1 or $5 nowadays for. It's turned into this complete throwaway society that the youth don't care about a lot of these antiques. that, the family heirloom type things, because so many families are kind of broken up, so there isn't this hand-me-down family stuff a lot. It's still there, but it's not quite there, and it's really disappearing, unfortunately.
Cool, Dan. Well, it is 1:41, and we want to be respectful of your time. We want to, Jesse, do you have any more questions, or should we go to speed round?
I think let's just go to speed round, unless Dan has any questions for us, or if he has anything he wanted to say.
What's your summary of, like, the major difference, if you were to summarize, major difference or differences between Generation X and the millennial generation? And
major differences, I can see our past skill set disappearing, and it concerns me. I think I won't see it in my lifetime. You two probably won't see it too much in your lifetime, but your children are really going to see it. So they're just really going to start realizing that the development of skill sets just isn't there. It's all a digital life now. This new gen that's coming down, you look at these kids, these younger kids, all of them are sitting in grocery stores in their cars and their bikes on the corners. You can sit in a restaurant right now and have an older group of people sitting there, and most of them are talking and having communications. You see the younger kids sitting at a table, they're all stuck with their face directly in their phone. In fact, we just saw a little interview with some girl on the news last night. They had interviewed her about some stuff going on. What was so funny was the way they interviewed her. She was so horrible with being social that she was staring down like she was staring at her phone the whole time. And it was very interesting. It was like she can't even communicate with someone without staring at her phone. I see that happening more and more, and it's just going to destroy the way society thinks about stuff.
So you don't necessarily think that they're replacing skills, or the skills are evolving. You think it's just a flat out regression of skills of the younger generations, losing skills outright, not necessarily right.
Yep, it's like the society that jumps on a ship and they're all told to just sit here and wait, and they grow fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. Eventually, they're so fat they can't move, and that's kind of what's happening.
That's an interesting take.
Do you think that especially for the younger generation, with the whole pandemic, being in school for a couple of years with a mask on, or not even being in school, just having these Zoom calls, I feel like that certainly just enhanced and made those communication skills even worse. Enhanced by that, I mean in a bad way.
Yep. Because a teacher sitting online, imagine, we're right now on this podcast, and imagine having 15, 20 students in front of you with little tiny squares. You can't see what that kid's doing with his hands, You don't know if the kid's got his phone sitting there, I'm sitting there on my phone. You have no clue that this is in my hand, and I can do 100 things right now, and you two have no clues of what I'm doing. And you're finding that a lot in industry and in schools nowadays. You don't have the teacher that walks up to your desk with her ruler and slaps it on your desk going, pay attention. That's not happening anymore. So that urgency is disappearing.
You want to hit Dan with the speed round, Kai Primo?
Yeah, let's hit the speed round. So this is just basically you just said question and answer, and this is just kind of like favorite X, and then you list it. And this goes for everybody. Okay, so ready? So favorite music, band, etc.
80s hair bands. Still love it. And more or less, I'm more of an instrumental type person nowadays. Still love the old 80s hair bands, but I'm more into Joe Satriani and stuff like that, where it's more instrumental.
Okay. Growing up, it was rock and roll and grunge for me.
Yeah, grunge killed hair bands, though.
Yeah, that we did.
Nirvana.
That we did. TV shows.
Oh, old school, Gilligan's Island, Scooby-Doo, from my era kid. Those were my favorite. Nowadays, I'm really into Oak Island, The Curse of Oak Island. Love the whole idea of the buried treasure. read that book read that article out of Reader's Digest when I was a kid. I always thought about it. When this series came out, I haven't missed an episode since.
Interesting.
For me, it'd be Seinfeld when I was younger, and right now South Park, even though South Park has been on for over 2 decades now.
Yeah,
that's funny. I was going to say when I was younger, it's South Park, and now I don't think I have one. And activity in your era, favorite activity in your era?
I guess cars. Yeah, I mean, I've always been into cars, so I always like building things. So that's kind of my activity is I build and repair. I was never a big sports person, so not into a lot of sports. I'd rather drag race than throw a baseball any day. Still not into sports. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. When I was growing up, it was inline skating, like with the skateboarders.
Oh yeah, okay.
Were you inline skating on Venice Beach on the boardwalk back
No,
in the
I didn't
day?
live in Venice at the time.
Oh, so you got out of...
This was high school days, yeah. And then I got into surfing, but
so you're doing the whole cone thing, going.
No, like rails and jumps and things.
Oh, okay.
It's stupid. It really messes up your body. But anyway, it was fun while it lasted. And last is favorite movie of your era.
Oh, of my era, Two-Lane Blacktop.
Never seen it.
And Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one.
That's certainly a classic nowadays, which of course dates yourself. For me, I would have to say it was probably Forrest Gump, which came out in 94 was a good year. I mean, that year also was Shawshank Redemption, which is also
that's a good movie, yeah.
Was up there, and also the Professional.
Yeah,
came out
Saving
94
Private
as well.
Ryan.
Yeah, I believe Saving Private Ryan, or that was.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
No, Saving Private Ryan is 90s.
Yeah, it's just not 94, but I was just thinking out loud in my head at the same time, which turned out to a bunch of gargles.
I was gonna say Legally Blonde.
Oh, jeez, really?
You were. I think you're teasing.
That was a joke. That was a joke.
Yeah. Kai Primo's not. Yeah.
No, but it's a movie you enjoy when you're just like kind of a stoner movie for sure.
Yeah.
When you got nothing else to watch.
If you ever want a car movie, there's that movie of Two-Lane Blacktop. I don't know if you two have ever seen it, but it's an old
we're gonna watch
classic type thing.
I've never even heard of it, but I'm definitely we're gonna download it and watch it. Just if it was your favorite movie, it's gotta be good.
There's 4 characters in it. There's the driver, the mechanic, the girl, and the guy that drives the GTO. That's it. It's a very interesting show. So
we're gonna watch it, and we're gonna let you know if it is, because we are after all the next generation.
It's a car guy movie. There's no doubt about it.
It's a car guy movie.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for joining us and sharing some stories. And we had a blast. This is so awesome.
Yeah,
we love your energy.
Cool. So
I hope we see you again. And
thank you much. Yeah,
I hope we see you again in another Packer game.
Yeah, I hope you guys have a safe trip back and everything. So definitely got to come back and visit sometime and let us know when you're back in town. That'd be awesome. So
heck yeah. Oh, or maybe we'll see you at Burning Man one day.
Oh, hell yes.
You build things. Yep. You belong there.
I so would want to go there.
Yeah, we'll see you at Burning Man.
So
I had the worst experience this year, but maybe another time. Maybe next year. Maybe I won't come back for a while. Yeah, I still have dust lung. It's awful.
Oh, jeez.
It just your lungs. My lungs trying to cough it up. It's like I've had a cough for over a month now. It's awful. You don't sleep.
Oh.
It's terrible. But the experience, when not like slaving away, I would love to experience it like as an experience. Thank you guys for watching. That is it for this episode of El Podcast, the greatest virtual happy hour in the world. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube. And if you enjoy this episode, please give us a like, because it does help us out in the YouTube algorithm. You can also find us on Spotify, El Podcast. And thank you. We appreciate you guys. And you can also find us on TikTok at El Podcast Media. And we will see you on the next episode.